Well, it's the morning after, the night before here in Porto, a remarkable Champions League final. We saw Chelsea defy the odds to beat Manchester City 1-0. Delighted to say I'm joined by the Athletics Chelsea correspondent Liam Twomey. Liam, talk us through the game. Where was this won for Chelsea and ultimately lost for Manchester City and Pep Guardiola?
Yeah, I think it was very much a tactical victory. You have to say the third tactical victory that Thomas Tuchel has had over Pep Guardiola in the last 6 weeks, which is absolutely remarkable. I think, again, Chelsea came in with a very clearly defined game plan, quite similar to what they did in the FA Cup semi-final and in the Premier League, in terms of how to stop City in central areas, to kind of force them wide, and to make it difficult for them to create through the middle of the pitch. And of course, to create turnovers and counter-attack themselves. And on the other side, it seemed like City, in particular Guardiola, allowed his game plan to become a little bit muddled by the changes that he made. I think it was 59 out of 60 matches this season he's played Rodri or Fernandinho, and then on the biggest occasion of all, he decides not to go with either of them and play İlkay Gündoğan, who's been an attack-minded midfielder all season, as their deepest midfielder. And I think that the way the game panned out, that made it easier for Chelsea to launch those counter-attacks, and so that kind of made the difference in the game, I think.
You know Thomas Tuchel really well. What do you think he thought when he saw that team selection from Pep?
Well, he said after the game that it was the one surprise. Everything else about City's team he was expecting, but he was expecting Fernandinho, he said, to be in the lineup. Honestly, I don't think he'd ever admit it, because Tuchel and Guardiola get on really well, and I don't think he'd ever want to criticise a person he considers a friend publicly. But I think he was probably very happy when he saw that team, because he thought this gives us a better chance to execute what we want to do. And it was just an all or nothing play, I think, for Guardiola, because he was banking on the attacking potential of his own team and how maybe Gündoğan at the base of midfield could improve that, rather than thinking about what Chelsea could do to them on the break. And in addition to the goal that Kai Havertz ends up scoring, I mean, Timo Werner had 2 golden chances in the first 15 minutes. Christian Pulisic missed another big one in the second half. You have to say Chelsea were the more dangerous team in the game, playing to Tuchel's game plan.
I was going to say that, because they won 1-0, but in the end, I think if you were to pick a result, having watched the whole of the game, you'd probably say Chelsea could have won by more.
Yeah, definitely, and I think it was the lowest expected goals rating that Manchester City have had all season against anyone, and Chelsea were pretty healthy in terms of the number of chances they created, especially when you consider how little of the ball they had, particularly in the second half as they tired. And I think the game took on a different dynamic once Pulisic missed that chance that really could have put the final away. You could see how tired Chelsea were, and I remember at one point in the final few minutes, it was a Kyle Walker cross drifted out of play, and both N'Golo Kante and Ben Chilwell bent over and did really long stretches for cramp. And it was clear Chelsea was straining every sinew. I'm not sure they would have been able to do extra time, but it was worth it because they got over the line in the end.
You were one of the lucky 16,500 or so inside the stadium. Just describe what the atmosphere was like for the Chelsea fans and all around the stadium after that final whistle went.
I mean, it felt all through the evening that there were a lot more than 16,000 fans in the stadium, because I think once you get beyond a certain number, the echo of the arena does the rest, and it was an incredible atmosphere. You could see the belief that Manchester City went into it with. You could see how important the game was to their fans. But at the final whistle, it was just, bedlam. Chelsea players collapsing all over the place, hugging each other, staff running onto the pitch, family members running onto the pitch. I think these moments are always particularly emotional because of the people involved and what you know about their stories. And Chelsea, it would have been the same for City, but with Chelsea there were some really nice stories in there. You think about Edouard Mendy, who was close to giving up the sport and is now, in his first season at Chelsea, won the biggest prize of all. And players like Cesar Azpilicueta, Antonio Rudiger, obviously Thiago Silva, who lost the final last year, players who could maybe convince themselves that this was their last chance to win this trophy. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got someone like Kai Havertz, who's had a really difficult season, came into the game as a really controversial starter in the mind of some, and ends it as a Chelsea legend in the space of 90 minutes. So absolutely incredible what this game can do.
And that feeling of delight you mentioned there, Liam, echoed on the front and back pages of all of the local papers here in Porto today. A bola says Festa a Inglesa, English party, and a great photo of all of the Chelsea players celebrating as Cesar Azpilicueta holds the famous Champions League trophy aloft. And Kai Havertz, the star man, the goal scorer, he's holding the trophy as well there with his teammate Timo Werner. And that feeling of happiness, enjoying their football, is something that Thomas Tuchel has actively instilled in this team.
Yeah, I mean, you heard right from the start when he came in some of the quirkier training drills he was doing, with tiny footballs, just to try and break things up a bit for these Chelsea players, and in the middle of a packed season, and try to make sure that their minds were kept fresh. And it's also much easier to be bought in when the team's winning. And I think that's been happening since very early on in the Tuchel era. They gathered this momentum early, and he was able to sell these players on what he wanted to do tactically. And once that happens, of course, as the season goes on, as it comes towards the end, you get to these big games, you have to disappoint players, you have to leave them out. I'm sure there will be some Chelsea players that have sort of bittersweet feelings in that dressing room because they would have liked to have played a much bigger part in this success, but they are still a part of it. And when you have a success like this, I think everyone's always going to be delighted with the manager who's helped make it happen.
It's still easy to forget just how short a time, relatively, he's been at the club. Are you surprised at how quickly he's managed to turn things around since Frank Lampard left?
Yeah, it's astonishing. I mean, you go back to the end of January and where Chelsea were as a team, the noises that you were getting off the pitch as well as the performances you were seeing on it, and they were just so far away from this level. It's remarkable to see, I think, and Tuchel himself had never been parachuted into a club in mid-season. He admitted when he came in that this was going to be a different challenge for him, and he didn't even know how well it was going to go. And I think it has to go down now as one of the best top-end coaching jobs of modern times, because he's imprinted this identity on this team very early on with minimal training time, playing every 3 days across 3 competitions. They've got to the final of 2 and won the biggest of all, and finished in the top 4, which was always the minimum objective of who was succeeding Frank Lampard. So he's done an amazing job.
Knowing Tuchel, he'll always want to be pushing forward. What does he focus on over the summer? Where does he need to strengthen?
Well, I think Chelsea had decided long before this game they needed a new striker. You saw Tammy Abraham wasn't involved in the squad for the Champions League final. That relationship has clearly been done for quite some time. He will be moving on elsewhere. You'd expect probably Olivier Giroud to leave as well. So Chelsea desperately need a number 9, just for bodies, but they do need an elite, reliable goal scorer. So that is the top priority. Also hearing that Chelsea are looking at centre-back options. They have a lot of decisions to make within their own squad about centre-backs, because Azpilicueta, Rudiger, Christensen, Silva all enter the final year of their deals, presuming that Silva does the 1-year extension this summer. So Chelsea have some long-term decisions to make about their defence, but I think they want a new body in as well. Speaking
of elite goal scorers, Timo Werner, I mean, he could have had a hat-trick before he went off. How would you rate his first season at Chelsea?
Yeah, I think it's not as simple as to say he's just been hugely disappointing. Clearly the finishing has been hugely disappointing, but Tuchel has kept playing him in this team for a reason, and it's because of the other things he brings to the team. It's the pressure that he puts on a defence with his constant running and testing of their offside trap and creating space for everyone else as a result. His movement is really smart. His decoy run creates that Havertz goal in the first half. So for good and bad, he's been a key part of everything this Chelsea team has done this season. And I think they can reasonably expect him to have a better finishing season. If you look at his 4 years at RB Leipzig in Germany, an average of that would be a significant improvement on what he's done in front of goal for Chelsea. So I think they can expect an improvement, and maybe if you put him in a secondary scoring role behind a proper elite number 9, you're really rolling as a team going forward.
And is that how you think Timo Werner will perhaps fit into the side if they do go out and sign a big-name striker slightly further back?
Well, I think Tuchel has often used him. I know he didn't against Manchester City, he was the number 9, but he's often used him as the sort of left 10, as he calls it. Not quite a winger, not quite a forward, in that sort of bespoke role in the middle where he can still make those runs in behind, but maybe pick up the ball a little bit deeper. And I think that fits really well if Chelsea get a proper number 9. And just in terms of scoring, this season has shown you probably can't rely on him to be your primary source of goals, but if you have that person and then he's your supplement to that, I think you can be a really good attacking team. And clearly that means difficult decisions will have to be made elsewhere. You've got Christian Pulisic, Hakeem Ziyech, Callum Hudson-Odoi, all didn't start the game. Hudson-Odoi didn't even get on the pitch. But that was going to be the case anyway. That's part of Tuchel's job, is that he's going to have to make these difficult decisions and disappoint players. The key is that Chelsea end up with a top team on the pitch, and I think if Werner is a key part of their future, and all the indications suggest he is, that's probably the role for him.
Looking ahead to next season, Tuchel's first full season in charge at Chelsea, what do you think we can expect from them?
It's so fascinating because what he's done over these 4 months it's been an exercise in pragmatism, really. He had to come in and identify the most pressing issues to fix in the team at the end of January. He did that phenomenally quickly in terms of defensive structure and the way they press, and just the general tactical sophistication has been really impressive. But we still don't know what he can do with a full pre-season, with a transfer window, with maybe 1 or 2 additions to this team. And I don't think we know what his ideal vision for the team is yet, because he just hasn't had a chance to do that. He's done what he can rather than what he wants so far. So I think ideally, he's not necessarily been as defensive as he's been in many games this season in the past in his coaching career. I think we'll probably see a more expansive, aggressive Chelsea team that look to dominate more in the style of Guardiola at City next season. But I'm sure he won't entirely go away from the incredible defensive base that has powered all this success.
Thanks, Liam. Well, it was a famous night for the Chelsea fans. They'll be heading back to London with a few sore heads, I think, but big smiles on their faces. And we'll see you next season.